Hi there, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. Geez, it's already 1 o'clock. Thank you for coming to join this webinar today. Thank you for being part of the Food Collective and allowing us to assist you with navigating where we're going in food safety. One of the reasons I say it's morning is we're sitting here in Cape Town with storms that I don't think I can be collecting in my lifetime. So yeah, that's why it feels like morning. So today, the Food Collective, I think this is probably our first public webinars. Hopefully we're going to do a lot more of these in the future. But we want to disseminate information to you. This is going to be our first one that we're doing. And we're going to be covering FSSC version 7 updates. The idea of this webinar is just to be informative. It's about sharing the updates with you. This is not, I would consider, absolute training. We're going to be creating very bespoke training on this, which we'll launch in the next sort of month or so, so that we can show competence to auditors. But I think most of you are going to need to just get a little bit of information about the changes. So yeah, I would encourage you to listen to the changes or listen to this webinar and ask as many questions as you can. I think that's the most important part. Just make sure I can do that. So we've created this QR code. Please scan this QR code. You can use the link to send questions during the session. And those session at the end of the session or during the session, we'll try and answer it as best we can. So send your questions if you have any. As I say, this is very much an awareness webinar. So some of those questions might be a little bit more of a detailed response. And it might lend itself to more webinars. It might lend itself to us answering questions and putting it in as a podcast. But yeah, please send your questions as much as you can. The more you ask, the more we can help. So without further ado, let's get started. The FSSC has decided to upgrade their requirements to version 7 of the scheme. The reason they've done that is ISO 22000 decided to update their requirements, and the FSSC needed to incorporate that into their official documentation. They've done a number of different things. In 2018, ISO 22000, the management element was upgraded, and now they've really upgraded the technical standards. The technical standards are not called technical standards anymore. It's just referred to as ISO 22002-, and there's 2 dashes. You get dash 100, and then you get dash with a number which is applicable to your scope. These updates also give more clarity on the food chain categories and subcategories according to the FSSC, and it defines it correctly for your business. This is very much an administrative task, but it is good to understand what that task is, because at the end of the day, that task is what the auditor requires to audit you appropriately and what you need to comply to appropriately. Furthermore, the FSSC has amended some of the additional requirements. They've included a few things, they've updated a few things, they've taken out a few things, and the audit process has also changed. Particularly, and as I suppose guys that go through audits, you'll like the fact that they've changed audit time. Some people's audit times might get a little bit longer. Others' audit times might get a little bit shorter. So audit time calculation is definitely going to be impacted by the changes that were made in version 7. So today we're going to cover 4 sections. Section 1 is the ISO 22002 standards for PRPs. Section 2, we're going to look at the categories and the subcategories. Section 3, we're going to go through the FSSC additional requirements. In section 4, we're going to go through the audit processes. So, section 1, ISO 22002-X. The reason we've said -X is their structure looks like this. They have a sector agnostic requirement. This is applicable to all sectors. So, -100 is applicable to everyone. Go into the SABS website or the ISO website and download ISO 22002-100. That is going to be the fundamentals of ISO 22002, which is applicable to every sector. And then following that, you're going to have to look at these other 6 different standards. And that is going to be applicable to the scope that you are going to be requiring in your facility. I typically deal with warehousing and with food manufacturing. So -1 and -5 is what I typically use for the customers that I work with. If you're in the catering industry, you're going to get -2. If you're in the packaging industry, you're going to get -4. And so you'll have to download both 100 and whichever one is sector specific to you to get to understand what's needed for your certification. One of the things that I found is when I downloaded it, -100 had a whole lot of stuff I needed to look at. There weren't many changes that I noticed personally, but there were certain things I needed to apply. The -1 for food manufacturing had a very few clauses that actually had sort of meat in it, but for the sake of compliance, for the sake of understanding your needs, you're going to have to download both of those documents. We have covered -100 and -1 in another webinar on the Food Collective, and if you guys are wanting to go into detail on that, I'd encourage you as your business to become members of the Food Collective, and you get access to the repository of training on the back end of there. We will host a webinar in the future just to show you how to access the Food Collective and what's on the back end, and I'd encourage you to do that at a later stage or after this webinar. So if we look at these 2 standards, the ISO 22002 standards, they're called prerequisite programs on food safety, and it's an international standard. It's not a technical specification anymore. It's part of the standards. When we go into section 2 and defining the categories and the subcategories, ISO 22000 has included these specific standards into the scope requirements of the different elements. So we'll see that if you're doing animal primary conversion, those scope requirements have included ISO -100, 22002-100, or 22002-1, as well as the additional requirements in the management system standard. So they've amended their scopes to include the specifics that are necessary for your business. If you're on catering or if you're in warehouse and retail, they would have done the same. So you're going to have to obviously download the additional requirements document and the ISO or the FSSC document explaining the changes to just confirm that your specific scope that the FSSC has defined, it tells you which ISO standard is specifically applicable to you. The FSSC is then also downloaded or expanded on the subcategories. Subcategories is very much for auditors to define the appropriate subcategory which goes on your certificate. So if you work in the dairy industry, you know that it's going to be a C1, but C13 is specific for dairy. So this is more for an administrative task. If you're trying to implement the standard, just download and comply with C1. And if you go back to C1, you're going to see which ISO standards are applicable to C1. So that's more an administrative task from an audit, maintenance, and management perspective. Section 3 is their additional requirements. This is where we get very much into the meat of the FSSC requirements. So once you've got your ISO standards downloaded and you've gone through those and gone through the training on the Food Collective, we can then look at the additional requirements of FSSC 22000. So let's go into the details of this as we go through each of the additional requirements one by one. Feel free to take notes and ask a few questions where applicable. So additional requirement 2.5.1, the management of services and purchased material. The red is the changes that have occurred in the additional requirements. You can see in addition to clause 716 of ISO, the additional requirement requires that the lab analysis used for verification or validation of parameters critical to food safety need to comply by this. The laboratory shall have the capability to produce precise and repeatable test results using validated test methods and best practices according to ISO 17025. The analysis shall be performed in accordance with the applicable requirements of ISO 17025. So it's looking at the methodologies of all test results critical to food safety. So I think where this comes in is if you have an internal lab and you're doing validation studies, they're trying to make sure that the results that you use is not just some random internal laboratory, but actually applicable and actually followed correctly. So it's putting a little bit more demand on your internal labs that you're probably going to have to look at accreditation status for your laboratories. For the food chain subcategories, so if you're looking at those subcategories, B3, C, D, I, F2, G, and K, those are defined by the FSSC. The following additional requirements applies. The organization must establish, implement, maintain, and review processes for raw material and finished product specs to ensure continued compliance with food safety, quality, legal, and custom requirements. Microbiological, physical, chemical, and allergen specifications used for the food safety purposes shall be based on appropriate scientific principles where relevant legislation is absent. So a lot of this is about your product specifications. You need to put a lot of thought into it. You need to understand the science of why we choose certain parameters. We understand that in the legal framework, we often find that there are no laws to say that certain things must be in place. I had a case today, actually, we were talking about E. coli in fresh meat. Now, what should it be? Less than 100, less than 10, 0. If you look at our legal framework for mince meat, there is nothing specifying it, but now we need to understand what is mince meat and go and see what's around from a scientific perspective in terms of its proliferation, its potential problems, and try and understand the organism and understand the process that we're following to make an informed decision, a scientific decision. We can't just thumbsuck the fact that it should be there or it should be 1,000. We need to justify and substantiate the limits that we choose. So quite a lot of work needs to go in there, and I think if you're going down the FSSC route, the amount of information required in the specs and the background information of why we choose things needs to be fully substantiated in those specifications. I think the 2 rules to take out of this: make sure your results are repeatable and reliable. So using an accredited laboratory is the best way of doing that. If not, you better look at implementing proper ISO analysis procedures in your lab and have proper proficiency testing in your inside lab if it isn't accredited, and make sure you correlate that with accredited results to prove that the results are reliable, and make sure you have very thorough specs in place, which is justified scientifically if you're coming up with stuff that's not defined by the applicable laws in your region. 2.5.2, product labeling and printed materials. Where an organization prints labels and raw materials, artwork management and print control procedures shall be established and implemented to ensure the printed material meets applicable customer and legal requirements. The procedure shall address the following as a minimum: the approval of artwork standard or master sample, process to manage change to artwork and print specifications and to manage obsolete artwork and printing materials, approval of each print run against the agreed standard or master sample, process to detect and identify printing errors during the run, process to ensure effective segregation of differing print variants, and process to account for any of the unused printed products. The main goal of this requirement is to make sure that the correct labels are always used. One can't just print labels and assume that it's going to be right. when labels change, we need to make sure that we run them out appropriately and that they're always applicable. So some organizations would print labels themselves, and some rely on printed materials. If you're relying on printed materials to just come to you, you still have an authority to make sure, or you have the responsibility to make sure that this artwork is appropriate for you as an organization. If you manufacture something and the label guys make the label, you need to make sure that they've made it appropriately. If you need to communicate change, you must manage that internally, and you must make sure that when you receive it, it is appropriate and that your current labels are isolated and a changeover happens appropriately. So I do believe there is a responsibility on a manufacturer, on someone that's applying labels to the product, to make sure that the approval happens. Obviously, if you also are manufacturing labels, you have a responsibility that you manufacture the correct ones, that you don't manufacture obsolete ones, and that you make sure that the artwork is correct when you're producing those labels, because we can't afford to have incorrect labels on packaging. So anywhere within that supply chain, you have a responsibility to make sure that the appropriate, correct, up-to-date label is printed and that old labels and redundant labels are removed so that they cannot get into the supply chain. I do think the FSSC over time will give us guidance documents on these type of points, and this definitely warrants more podcasts, more discussion points, more insight into the nitty-gritty of product labeling. But just know that you, as the manufacturer, as the primary producer, as the producer of label, you all have your part to play to make sure that the correct labels are being used all the time. The next point is food defense, 253 food defense. They've made a couple of changes to the clauses. I think it's just about getting a little bit more specific. Ensure that the food defense threat assessment and food defense plan are developed and maintained by personnel having the appropriate knowledge and competence. It would be lovely to ask the question what appropriate means. I don't think there are any globally recognized accreditation or credit training sort of platforms that can define what level of competence and knowledge is. But knowledge and competence can also come from engaging with someone to see that they actually know what they're talking about. And so, do you have to have a training record? Well, training records can demonstrate knowledge and competence, but some training's good, some training's not. Who knows if that's good enough or not? One would have to ask those questions, I suppose. But a level of training to understand food defense would be necessary to demonstrate knowledge. And from a competence perspective, a lot of the competence is shown in what you present and how you can articulate the topic. So the person that's presenting food defense and coordinating the team to the auditor, by them presenting it, they should demonstrate that they are competent and that they have been able to do it. So my strategy here would be, one would have to start engaging with training providers to upskill your food defense teams, to upskill your food defense leaders in the topic of food defense. That would probably be the easiest way to show that from a formal perspective. But at the end of the day, at some point, you're going to have to be able to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about. Quote B, ensure that the defense plan is implemented and supported by the system and complies with applicable legislation, covers the processes and products within the scope of the organization, and is kept up to date. So it looks like a lot of that is very much a editing for a language perspective. It's making the language a little bit more clearer. But at the end of the day, isn't fundamentally not much different to what was there previously. You have to have a plan, needs to support the current objectives of the system and make sure that it complies with laws and covers processes and products. So it's applicable to process and products. When it comes to the food fraud mitigation, this is very similar to what we had through defense, that there needs to be some sort of knowledge and competence involved. So again, show that you understand what food fraud means, that you understand how the systems work regarding food fraud. And I think as food fraud mitigation plans and strategies improve over time, there's a hell of a lot of research in those fields. Keeping up to date with what's happening with sort of accepted systems in the industry, that's where one's going to grow in that knowledge, and going to some sort of basic training for management, basic training for the food fraud team, more advanced training for the leader. Training providers are going to be able to provide this knowledge, and your competence is going to be engaging with this knowledge as well as engaging with things like podcasts. So hopefully the Food Collective the next 6 to 8 months is going to build its podcast repertoire. We're going to interview more people. We're going to discuss more system-related things. And as we get that out to the masses, that will assist in you guys updating your knowledge as you go down that road. Again, B and C, that's very much just improving the English of the way that they talk about things. So that's it's been there in the past, and it's still there. Ensure that the food fraud mitigation plan is implemented and supported by the organization's management system, complies with applicable legislation, covers the processes and products within the scope of the organization, and is kept up to date. And for food chain subcategory F2, in addition to the above, the organization should ensure that their suppliers have food fraud mitigation in place. So if you are falling within subcategory F2, your suppliers must also have food fraud mitigation in place. Management of allergens, 2.5.6 for food chain category D and pet food category chain C. Where there is no allergen-related legislation for the country of sale pertaining to animal feed or pet food, this section of the scheme requirements may be indicated as not applicable unless a claim relating to an allergen status has been made on the animal feed or pet food. So this is very much just about pet food manufacturers, but it's all around marking not applicable if it's not applicable. But if you are making any claims, you're going to have to substantiate that. So it's just bringing a little bit more clarity to the pet food requirement if there's no legislation in place. Food safety and quality culture. Note that we skipped 2.5.7, so obviously no changes were made to that particular clause. So we're looking only where the changes were made. Regarding food safety quality culture, a few things were added in accordance with and in addition to clause 5.1 of ISO 22000. As part of the organization's commitment to cultivating a positive food safety and quality culture, senior management shall establish, implement, and maintain a food safety quality culture objectives as part of the management system, and provide sufficient resources to maintain a positive food safety and quality culture. So what we're doing here is we're not just saying have a policy in place, but we're actually saying now you need to give the resources to ensure that it happens. So I think the main thing here is, well, I said it and I wrote a policy, but now we need to do a little bit more to that. So as you develop the plans, there might be things that need to be executed which require whether it's training resources or physical resources. These can be kept to a minimum, but the following elements should be included. So you need to make sure there's resources for communication, training, employee feedback and engagement, performance measurement of defined activities covering all sections of the organization impacting on food safety and quality. I think a lot of work can go in here, and this raises the opportunity for auditors to say, but you didn't give enough resource for you to have the time to do this, or the money to do this, or the resource to do X, Y, and Z. So be careful here, because it just opens up a number of cans of worms that could be addressed in an audit. So I do suspect a lot of findings in this area, and this could lend itself directly to resource provision non-conformances if not met. Clause B didn't really go into anything more, but I'll just go over it. The objectives shall be supported by a documented food safety and quality culture plan with targets and timelines, and included in the management review and continuous improvement processes of the management systems. So the main thing is that we actually have to execute whatever we do to identify. If you identify something, you must do something about it. And it needs to be very much documented with targets and timelines. And then the clause C, a demonstrated commitment from all personnel to the production of safe handling of food shall be available. So this opens up a little bit of interpretation, I think, from an audit perspective, because if I asked you to show me your micro results on a monthly basis, it's very much, I don't see the results, yes or no. But here, someone can walk around or ask a question, and an employee could say, no, but I haven't been interviewed, or I haven't had training, or this person did X, Y, and Z. So it's very much, it could become very much a hearsay thing, or a feeling thing. It looks to me like there's not much culture here as an auditor, so you dig a bit deeper, and it could come out that certain interviews or certain sort of observed things could be sort of culminate in a finding against it. So where we're going with this is that actually the company has to implement it. Because if I, as an auditor, potentially get a feeling that it doesn't look like there's much commitment here, I can start digging deeper and raise it against that clause. So it's very much morphing from a theoretical implementation perspective to you have to do it. And if you are doing it, it's very difficult to argue that you're not doing it. So getting a little bit of impetus in the implementation of food safety and quality culture systems is very important. If there are any questions, you guys must feel free to send them to us, and I'll try my best to answer them. But it's pretty simplistic here. Put in a system and make sure it's implemented properly. Excuse me. The next clause is transport, storage, and warehousing, 2.5.10. The organization shall establish, implement, and maintain a stock management procedure and specific stock rotation systems that includes FIFO principles in conjunction with the FIFO principles. So they've brought in management of stock. So again, just being a little bit more prescriptive. It includes pet manufacturers, and it just formalizes the requirement of management of stock. This stock management system is obviously going to have to be documented, and not just look at stock rotation, but management. So it's a bit more complicated than just rotating stock. PRP verification. PRP verification, food subchain categories B3, C, D, E, F1, G, I, and K. So effectively what they've done is they've stated that all PRPs need to be verified, and it is applicable to all food chain categories and subcategories. So for those of you in manufacturing in C, it's always been an issue that you've had to worry about. Now it's for all categories. So just make sure that one verifies all PRPs when you have it in place. 2.5.13, product design and development. There's quite a lot of changes here. All your product design and development procedures shall be established, implemented, and maintained for new products and changes to products or manufacturing processes to ensure safe and legally compliant production. The processes shall assess the impact of the changes on the system. The procedure shall assess the impact of the changes on the system, including new food safety hazards such as allergens, and update hazard analysis accordingly. And it should also consider the effect on process flow for both new and existing products, as well as resource, training, equipment, and maintenance requirements. So it's applicable to all subcategories. Sorry, I think I went a little bit further there. So all food subcategories need to conduct production and shelf life trials to validate product information and formulations. And the processes are capable, so effectively you need to make sure that your products are able to produce safe food and meet the customer requirements, and should have an ongoing shelf life verification in place based on risk. Organizations that design primary packaging and packaging material should take the following principles into consideration when developing new products or making changes to packaging as applicable. Effective containment and protection of the product from spoilage and damage throughout all steps in the supply chain. Preserve and extend the shelf life of the product being packed. Minimize food loss and waste. Clear communication to consumers on how to handle, store, and prepare food. Where any of the above-mentioned principles are incorporated, it shall not negatively impact on food safety. So the main thing here is that there needs to be a very much aligned program in place to make sure that your packaging and that your product, your packaging works and is able to protect the product. And the whole sort of mindset about this is that we want to eliminate throwing food away. We want to extend shelf life. I suppose this could talk a little bit about recyclability and things like that with packaging, in terms of packaging, the words are not with me at the moment. So we're looking at packaging integrity as well in terms of the utilization of packaging, but obviously the main focus here is protect the product, make sure we have less waste on the food product, and that we can utilize the packaging appropriately to protect the food product. Just want to go back to one thing. See, because both E's been copied here twice. That's an error already. That's why I got a bit confused. I do think we're going to elaborate a lot more on these in a lot more detail when we get into the nitty-gritty of it. For today, we're going to just highlight a lot of these clauses. 2.5.14 traceability. In addition to ISO 22000, the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain appropriate procedures and systems to ensure the traceability of all edible parts of a carcass is maintained until the carcass is deemed fit for human consumption, including blood for human consumption. So this is very much for meat processing systems and facilities where they need to have full traceability in place, not just for the animal carcass itself, but for all aspects of the animal. So if a carcass is split up, you've got other elements of the animal which do get eaten. They normally call that the red offal and potentially the brown offal, but brown offal normally gets thrown away. And then there must be traceability in space for all of this. I know in our South African meat processing environment, there is a lot of traceability on this as well. already. But I do think that this is very much specific for anyone with FSSC from all over the world that needs to make sure that they have all their traceability in place for all edible parts of the animal. Regarding food loss and waste, you have to have a documented policy and objective detailing the organization's strategy to reduce food loss and waste within the organization and the related supply chain. Objectives shall be supported by clear and measurable targets with defined timelines. So again, we're getting into this requirement to get a little bit more detailed with what we're wanting to achieve and then measure it to make sure we have achieved it within a specific timeline. One could get very precise with this. We could have weekly timelines, daily timelines. We could have figures doing things very regularly, or you could do it once a year, or you could do it once a quarter. So we need to think of what's appropriate for the business, the size of the business, and how we're managing. But the whole idea is sort of in line with the sustainability goals. I think it's United Nations sustainability goals, where we can show that we are improving our company on a continual basis to improve food loss and waste measurable items. This can look at a lot of different things within the organization. You can't just reduce waste, you actually put those targets and actually put them in place, and it can look at reducing raw material waste, it can look at minimizing rework, it can look at improving yield, reducing packaging waste, or reducing products disposal. So the main thing is that we have to define what those parameters are, measure those parameters, and make sure that we sort of affecting them. When you go back to audits, often they ask, what are your measurable objectives in an audit to meet the system? And I think this is an element that can be brought in as measurable objectives to your generic audit with a specific focus on food loss and waste. From an audit process perspective, regarding audit durations, additional audit time is linked to the staff numbers in HACCP studies. For a minimum duration of 1 day, which is defined as 8 hours. In category C, D, and K, we can have 2-day audits and more than 2-day audits. And in smaller organizations, we can have 1.5 man-day audits or more realistic audit durations. So very much the key changes with version 7 is a more structured way of calculating audit duration. Additional time is clearly linked to the number of employees in HACCP studies with defined ranges of half a day, 1 day, or 1.5 days. And once that audit day calculation has been sort of calculated by your certification body, it tends to not be a reduction allowed for that. So certification bodies, when you book your audit, they're going to say this is how long it's going to take. And then that's what it is. And there should be benefits for small organizations with a minimum of 1 day obviously needed to conduct it. Yeah, I think one must ask the certification bodies to provide you with those calculations, and then I probably have to run through it in a little bit more detail in a more in-depth sort of podcast on calculations of audit durations at a later stage. Yeah, one of the big things is organizations with fewer than 20 employees and up to 2 HACCP studies may have a reduced audit time, but it will never be below a minimum of 1.5 days for any audit. So for the very small businesses, audit time is very much it's going to be reduced. It's not going to be excessive. And I think the main thing is to be a little bit more transparent and realistic with audit duration across all organizations. In general, Surveillance audits must occur within 12 months of the certification to avoid suspension. Early recertification audits start the new 3-year certification cycle, so you can do it a little bit earlier and then it starts a new 3-year cycle. New sites require a stage 2 audit and may need recertification if delayed. So if your first surveillance audit after stage 1 and stage 2 cannot exceed 12 months after, this becomes very specific, by the way, but you're going to, 12 months after your stage 2, you're going to have done your initial surveillance audit. Your certificate can be suspended if your surveillance audit does not happen within the time frame required. So I don't know where the onus is going to fit. Is it going to be the certification body saying your audit will be by this date, or if it's going to be you that gets into trouble? But audit times and the schedule of audit has to be respected in order to maintain your certification. So if you haven't heard it from your certification body, you better contact them at about 10 months to go to say, when is my next surveillance audit booked for? Because if it's going to be too late, or if it's delayed for whatever reason, it could cause problems with the suspension of certificates. Recertification audits cover the full system, and if done more than 6 months before the certificate expires, a new 3-year cycle starts from that audit, shortening the current certificate's validity, and the company must be informed beforehand. So you can do early ones, but don't do it too early, because it does, a new cycle starts and it shortens certificate validity. I think the rule of thumb here is just make sure you know when your audit date is. Make sure it's within sort of a month or two before the date of the expiry. And if you're going to be moving to a new site, a stage 2 audit is required to start a new 3-year cycle of certification. So that's very much, say we've got stage 1 and stage 2 this year, and then we do the surveillance next year. And the following year, you should be doing another surveillance audit, but we decided we needed to move. That becomes a stage 2 audit. It doesn't really impact the audit length because audit length is predefined. It's just the nature of it, and a new 3-year cycle starts. So the certificate at the old site was drawn. Once the operation stops, and the new site must be audited within 6 months, otherwise a full initial audit is needed. So it's quite nice that they include that if you're in that cycle, you don't have to restart with stage 1 at a new site. You can go straight to stage 2 within that 6-month period. Remote audits. A full remote audit can be done in exceptional circumstances if requirements are met, but only twice in a row, and after that an on-site audit is mandatory. So they can do remote audits. Think back of COVID and how we did remote audits during COVID, but it has to be really exceptional. You can't just sort of request one because you feel like it. When it comes to multi-site certifications, and we've had a number of people that have asked us about multi-site audits. If your operations are split across different locations, they can be included in one audit, provided they belong to the same company, operate under the same system, and are located in the same country. This definitely answers a question that I've already had on this, because one of the questions I would ask was, I have a factory in Johannesburg and I have a factory in Cape Town, but we run one system. Yes, it can be multi-site. So it will impact the time of the calculation. So it could reduce your audit fees, but at the same time, it's going to be one auditor going to both places. There's going to be travel included in that. It's going to be a whole lot of sort of permutations. So the savings there is it's one system. You can have one non-conformance system. You can have one customer complaint system. You can have one food safety policy applicable to both sites. So a little bit of wisdom in setting up your system means that you can have a factory at Cape Town and a factory at Joburg doing a multi-site certification, which is maybe not a bad thing for a brand, because then it's one certificate with one name on it that's applicable to product manufactured at 2 different locations. This is limited to a main site with one additional site or a campus-style setup. Define campus style. Does it mean that different operations? So this is where ambiguity comes into it, because what is it limited to? What is a main site? What's an additional site? So FSSC will have to provide clarity on that. My best advice to you as a company, if you're going to go this route and maybe choose multi-site, is speak to the certification body. Certification body, this is how we structured it. This is how it is. Can you give us a quotation and show us what's going on? But I do think that you're allowed to do it if it's one company. So go ahead and do it if it's one company. Point 3, off-site storage may be included if it is directly linked to operations and only stores your product. So if it's going to be a totally different warehouse that stores a whole lot of different stuff, that is a totally separate business operation. If it's your warehouse that you manage at a different site, it can be included. So if we're storing other people's things, you're going to have a separate audit, separate category, separate system. So that's how that works. A 50% reduction of the base audit time may be applied to off-site locations. Each off-site storage or distribution site adds at least 2 hours to the audit. So you simply transfer only sites are excluded. Simple transfer only sites are excluded. So if you do transshipments, if I have a business and I just move one product from one place to another place and I don't actually get involved in it, then that's completely separate. And then auditors are required to clearly report what was audited at each location, including sufficient evidence per site, meaning combined or unclear audit reporting is no longer acceptable. So from an audit perspective, it's very much site specific. They're going to want to see implementation at each site. They're going to want to see what is the shared stuff that is sort of disseminated to each site. But I think each business who is wanting to consider multi-site certification is going to have to sort of engage with the certification body, have a very thorough management system in place, and it's going to make sure that they can actually do it. So the quotation from the certification body is where the process is going to start to confirm that you can do it. Artificial intelligence is another thing that they brought into this, where artificial intelligence is being used in the certification process. So this is applicable to certification processes where they use AI in the background. This is not regarding manufacturers using AI. The certification body shall, as a minimum, have the following requirements. They need to have a defined artificial intelligence governance framework to ensure the responsible and ethical use of AI. Must meet the principles of fairness, accountability, reliability, accuracy, transport, confidentiality, and security. AI technologies used shall comply with relevant regulatory requirements, and industry best practice should be followed to ensure legal and ethical alignment. Conduct a documented risk assessment for each system in place and address as a minimum risk in AI development, deployment, and use. Identify risks must be mitigated appropriately and measures implemented and largely reviewed. AI systems shall be tested and validated for applicability, accuracy, repeatability, and safety before being deployed, and continuous monitoring mechanisms for AI systems shall be implemented. So we can use AI if CB wants to use AI. I assume they would use that with audit planning and those type of things, but it needs to be thoroughly and rigorously controlled if you're going to utilize it. The AI system must not compromise the integrity, impartiality, confidentiality, and credibility of the certification process. It may be used as an aid or support tool, but cannot replace human judgment, oversight, and key decision-making. It shall not replace the certification functions as defined in Annex C of ISO 22003-1. Clear roles and responsibilities shall be defined for AI-driven decisions, including mechanisms for corrective actions in case of errors or unintended consequences. Relevant personnel should be trained on AI ethics and governance, the AI systems used, and shall have understanding of the AI limitations and potential risk. The use of AI shall be transparent, explainable in terms of its scope, and applicable, communicated to relevant stakeholders, including but not limited to a certified organization, FSSC, and accreditation bodies. So I think the nice thing about this is we're considering AI to be used in the certification process. I think it's a very powerful tool that can maybe assist with everything, but there's a lot of rigor that needs to go into using AI. And this is not about the sort of people implementing FSSC, that this has some sort of application. This is about clearly the certification bodies utilizing AI to improve their processes. So hopefully that's going to make it maybe slightly cheaper audit, slightly more efficient audit, maybe slightly more rounded and thorough audit, and an appropriate audit. That is the changes that the FSSC has sort of unloaded on us. I think in summary, it's not massively excessive. I think version 5 to version 6 was a lot more requirements that needed to be implemented. But yeah, I think from a food collective standpoint, this has been a nice little summary to go through. And we, over the next sort of maybe 6, 8, 10 weeks, are going to go into a little bit more detail in each one of those clauses so that we can give a little bit more practical tips in terms of implementing those issues. I take food fraud and food defense and food safety culture. The one is talking the change, but I think we need to look at the changes in light of the sort of the way it fits within the system. So I actually want to go through a podcast and go through the details of those individually. So yeah, if you have any questions, send away. Jana, if you're listening, I don't know if any questions were submitted and maybe we can answer something. But if there are no submitted questions, I don't see any submitted questions, then I would encourage you to email us at the Food Collective. Go to thefoodcollective.co.za. There's a contact form there. The more you can send us, the more we can give back to you as industry. And there's a lot of people that I can see on here. There's 45 of you. I haven't spoken to all of you. If you are not familiar with the Food Collective, follow us on LinkedIn. Go to the website. We're trying to build a database of everyone that plays a role in the Food Collective. So if your company is not listed and you'd like to be listed, please create a user profile and list your company, and let's have a meeting to discuss how it can work for your company. And if you are not involved, we've got a massive training platform on the back end. So anything from basic food safety for your foods, your employees in your factory, through to advanced HACCP and FSSC 22000, that's available on the platform. So I'd love each and every one of you to go to the Food Collective.co.za, join us on the platform and utilize the platform so that we can disseminate information to you in a concise and fun way. But yeah, I see there's no questions submitted. So if there are no further questions, thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, we can connect on the next podcast. So follow up for more engagement. Thanks for attending, guys.